Welcome. This podcast is based on a talk that I gave earlier today to the RSA in their second online conversation session with fellows as part of how they're reacting and adjusting to the current SARS coronavirus 2. Thank you for watching this podcast. I have one request of you during this podcast. Please don't ask if what I'm saying is crazy. Rather ask, is it crazy enough to have a possibility of working? The SARS coronavirus 2 is our current acute mess. I moved to Beijing late in 2002, 6 months before the SARS coronavirus 1 hit Beijing. At the beginning, the Chinese authorities reacted slowly, as one might imagine, because it was the first time that something like this had hit them. Then they reacted very quickly, very thoroughly, for example, building a 1,000-bed concrete hospital on a greenfield site in less than a week. When the SARS coronavirus 2 hit, China reacted very quickly, very well. A question we ought to ask ourselves is what led most other leaders in most other countries, whether in business or in politics, to react far slower than the exponential of the growth of the virus demanded. Equally, the climate emergency is our chronic mess. And yet, Limits to Growth was published in 1972, 48 years ago. Why haven't we already dealt with the climate change question so thoroughly and so competently already? Why have we let it turn into a full-blown climate emergency? I believe that we can learn something useful about why that is by looking at apartheid South Africa. I grew up in apartheid South Africa, and I see a lot of common DNA between the fundamentals of apartheid and the fundamentals of how we structure business in our economy. But before I go into that, let's take a bit of a closer look at the mess we're in. We have today the coronavirus, climate emergency, rampant anxiety, pollution, the precariat, people with no job or a very insecure job, a world of mistrust, polarization, injustice, and division, a world that only works for the few. And yet I can imagine that everybody watching this would love to live in a world like this, a world of clean air, clean water, where everyone is healthy, where we have success and self-respect, where we have security and freedom, cooperation and competition, where everyone has a chance to achieve their goals with a stable income, a world that meets all of your needs, individually and collectively. A world that I would call a uni-one world, because everyone can show up with 100% of their uniqueness, and everybody is together 100% one humanity. Why don't we have this uni-one world? A big part of the reason, I believe, is because business is failing to do what we really need business to do. Why is business failing at? Is it because we have designed companies to maximize financial returns to financial investors? If that is the case, then maximizing returns, investor returns, must be wrong. I actually don't believe that. I believe just the opposite. However, following that, we've tried many things like B corporations, ethics-based leaderships, business must be circular, business must deliver on the triple bottom line, impact investing, many other things. Many of these practitioners are aiming at not maximizing profit. But necessary as they all are, and I don't knock any of them because we need all of them, I ask myself, why have they so far failed to deliver the transformation that we so desperately need? Why did it take so long to act when SARS coronavirus hit? Why is the climate emergency still getting worse? Even if you don't buy what I'm about to say, please rent it for the rest of this podcast and play with it as for long as you like to see where it takes you. What if maximizing profit and investor returns is the central purpose of all business? Does this sound crazy to you? Crazy enough that maybe it will generate some value? I hope so. I argue that what we need to do is drastically, radically expand our understanding of what capital, profit, and investment means. What if all capitals are multiplied by a company, not just money? All natural capitals, social, relationship, intellectual, human, manufactured, and financial capitals must be multiplied. Maximum profit in each of these capitals in their natural currencies, not just in money. Isn't that exactly what a regenerative economy is? To create this one world through creating a regenerative economy, we can't do it if we aim at less capitalism. We need big capitalism, big enough to include all capitals. So why aren't we doing just that? Because apartheid. The very essence of apartheid is in the original Dutch word. Apart, meaning separation or division, and hate, a suffix meaning a context of. Apartheid as a word simply says a context of separation. All of the other evils emerge from that. In South Africa, the separation was based on skin color. I grew up as a white South African, and so I benefited from having the exclusive right to vote and the lion's share of the wealth generated. What do we have in business today? If somebody is lucky enough to have enough money to invest, you have the lion's share of the wealth generated and the sole right to vote in the general meetings that elect the leaders of the company. It's the same story of superiority. In apartheid, having whiteness. In business, having money. Apartheid could never create a South Africa where all could thrive. So why do we expect to get a one world if we are trying to build that world on a context of separation rather than a context of inclusion? Think about it. In business, there is a wide range of capitals and an equally wide range of investors. Why do we only recognize the one capital and the one investor type? You have staff, suppliers, customers. They're all investing human capitals. Cities invest their infrastructure, long-term stability, education. And of course, nature invests the full spectrum of the natural capitals that business needs to thrive. To get a regenerative economy capable of creating the one world we want to live in, we must reinvent business so that each and every business maximizes all capitals and includes all stakeholders in governance and wealth sharing. Still with me? Does what I'm saying sound crazy? Only crazy can get us out of the mess we're in. And the good news I'll get to in the moment, everything I'm saying, you can do now with existing company law. I'll emphasize what I've said. This context of separation, the way we incorporate, is a fundamental reason why so many of the very important approaches have not yet become the norm. Why circular, for purpose, triple bottom line, impact investing, conscious capitalism is not yet the norm. We need to include all capitals. We need to break free of the trap of this context of separation that business is in. Because this is all invented, we can reinvent it. we can reinvent inclusive incorporation, where all the tension between investors of different kinds of capital, all of their unique perspectives and needs, is inside the company. Only by harnessing that tension inside one company can we really create a regenerative economy with strong companies capable of harnessing each individual's strengths and each capital's unique contribution. Now, as a side comment, what I'm talking about here only applies to the general meetings and voting there. All operating decisions, of course, are taken by the executives and the rest of the staff, as in any normal company. Perhaps pause this in a moment and reflect for a moment for yourself. What do you think would change in the world if you and everybody around you had voting rights and a share of the wealth generated in any company that you work in, buy from, or supply to? If you are a gig worker, what would change if you had an equitable share of voting rights and the wealth generated? What would change in healthcare if all companies were like that? What would Uber, Facebook, Amazon, and many of the other large companies today be like if they were incorporated in this inclusive way? Want to know how to do it? You can do it now. Here's one way. The FairShares Commons works now because it's built on what we all already know and have used for decades: the standard limited company or the standard cooperative. By starting with that, you can build an inclusive company, a FairShares Commons, that includes all capitals and all stakeholders. I cannot stress this enough. Even though company law can be improved and must be improved, there is a huge amount that we can do now. And if we do it now, it will make it so much easier for the politicians to make the changes that we need them to make, because they will have success stories, proof of what's needed and how it works. So here's how you can build your FairShares Commons company. Identify all of the relevant capitals, identify who the investors of these capitals are, define a class of shares representing each of these investors and capital types, put inclusive commons values into your constitution, incorporate. Do that, and you will get a company that looks like this. You will have shares for financial investors. Of course, we need in almost all companies financial investors, and we need to generate healthy financial returns. After all, at some point, each of us is going to retire, at least. And that investment and the return on that investment is what enables us to retire, let alone everything else we need to do. Just as important, there will be staff shares for everyone working in the company. There will be supplier shares, etc., etc. This recognizes their investment of human capitals. You may well have shares for the representatives of nature or for the city that you're based in. None of these shares carry any of the financial value of the company. None of these shares can ever be bought or sold, so the company as a whole cannot be bought or sold. However, every single one of these shares qualifies for voting rights in the general meeting and a share of the wealth generated. Most importantly, you also have stewards. These are like the trustees in a trust. They have to vote according to the principles of the company, not according to their own needs. They also have vetoes against every vote that might weaken those principles or make the company property that can be sold. If you do all of this, you will end up with this kind of ecosystem of companies. This will enable a circular economy to become anti-fragile, because it naturally forms an open regenerative ecosystem and circle. Each company is able to trust every other company in the circle for the long term, they're able to compete and collaborate to optimize the whole, because each company has full information rights and voting rights in the other companies in the circle that it has a relationship with. The lack of this systemic long-term trust in incorporation, the fact that any investor can at a whim sell a company that they are invested in and break the circle, I believe is one of the fundamental reasons why circular is not yet the norm that it ought to be and that we need. Now, one caveat. This FairShares Commons incorporation is not the whole solution. For any of this to work well, we need all four layers here. Once we have all four layers working well and healthily together, then we automatically get healthy ecosystems and healthy ecosystems of ecosystems. So, in closing, if we want to live in a Uni-One world, if we want to clean up messes like our current corona and climate emergencies, I maintain we must end this context of separation in business. We must incorporate based on a new story, including all investors of all capitals, including them in governance and in wealth sharing. We must have businesses that cannot be bought or sold, businesses that are fully free to contribute to their full unique potential and free to be held fully accountable if they cause harm. Our FairShares Commons is one approach that can do this now by building off existing company formats. We're doing all we can to create a Uni-One world through our consulting, training, and startup incubation, and we're working this year on starting up an investment fund. What are you willing to do in your world that can transform the fundamentals? Find out more by reading my book. Develop your own capacity to thrive in a nebulous, uncertain world. Start up your own company using the FairShares Commons or some other inclusive incorporation. And perhaps most importantly, make your money matter and make your time matter. Thank you for the time that you have invested in listening to this podcast. I trust that it will be rewarding to you.